When Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Daniels stepped off the plane in full uniform 3 days later, the silence in the school hallway was so heavy it felt like judgment, and everyone knew this was no longer about hair, it was about war. The clippers roared like angry wasps, their metallic hum filling the cramped nurse's office and vibrating against the tiled walls. Ariel Daniels sat frozen in the chair, her wide, tear-glossed eyes fixed on the mirror before her. One braid slipped loose, sliding down her shoulder, then another, until they landed on the linoleum like fallen soldiers. Each one had been carefully woven with her mother before deployment, each strand a shield hiding the tender, barren patches alopecia had carved across her scalp. Now, under the ruthless buzz of the machine, those shields were being stripped away one by one. Ariel's sketchbook had always been her sanctuary. In its pages lived birds with wings outstretched, rivers flowing endlessly to distant horizons, and faces that smiled when her own couldn't. She carried it like armor, slipping pencil to paper during moments when the world felt too sharp. Her braids were part of that armor too, her camouflage, her way of moving quietly through the crowded halls of Lakeside Middle without questions or cruel jokes. She knew the moment they were gone, there would be no hiding left, only exposure, only shame. The woman standing above her wielded the clippers not as a tool, but as a weapon. Ms. Evelyn Ror was a tall, angular figure, with lips pressed thin into a line that rarely softened. 2 decades of teaching had sharpened her edges rather than softened them. Discipline was her gospel, control her pulpit. Where other teachers saw children to nurture, she saw threats to authority. Ariel, quiet and brilliant, should have been invisible to her, but invisibility didn't last long when Ror's cold gaze landed on something Saw's. He deemed out of line, and this morning, it was the braids. It began in algebra, where sunlight slanted across desks and Ariel sketched in the margins of her notebook, a swallow mid-flight, wings breaking free from the page. She'd finished the equations already, numbers neat in the left-hand column, but Ms. Ror swooped down the aisle, heels clacking like a metronome of doom. She plucked the sketchbook from Ariel's desk and flipped through it, lips curling in disdain. "This is why your grades are slipping," she announced, though everyone in the room knew Ariel's scores topped the charts. Too busy pretending to be an artist to focus on real work. Then her gaze slid to Ariel's hair, and her eyes narrowed with predatory delight. "Excessive," she declared, "distracting, against the new dress code." Ariel's throat constricted. She tried, voice trembling, to explain about her alopecia, about the papers her mother had filed before leaving overseas, but Ror's expression hardened and she cut her off with a sharp bark. "Excuses." She gripped Ariel's arm, yanking her to her feet before the class. The humiliation spread like wildfire through the room, 24 pairs of eyes watching as Ariel shrank inward. Only Maya, her best friend, dared to meet her gaze, slipping a hand into her pocket to press record. The hallway stretched endlessly as Ror marched her toward the nurse's office, fingers digging deep into her arm. Ariel's voice grew smaller with every step. "Please, just call my dad. Please." But no mercy lived in Ms. Ror's grip. Inside the nurse's office, Nurse Adams hesitated, brows furrowed, but Ror's voice cut sharp and decisive. "She's non-compliant. Dress code violation. Remove the extensions." The nurse faltered, mumbling about parental permission, but Ror's lie was smooth, practiced. "Already cleared. We'll handle this here." The clippers switched on. The sound filled the room. Ariel's pleas dissolved into silent sobs as the first braid fell. She pressed her palms together tightly in her lap as if prayer could stop the storm. Maya's phone captured it all, from the crack of the door, Ariel's trembling chin, the cruel glint in Ror's eye, the braids tumbling lifeless to the floor. When it was over, Ariel lifted trembling hands to her bare scalp, the cold air stinging against her exposed skin. She didn't recognize the girl in the mirror. The armor was gone, the camouflage stripped. What remained was raw, vulnerable, and unbearably visible. Her dignity buzzed away with the hair, leaving silence in its place. The house was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that presses against the walls and makes every creak sound like a scream. 12-year-old Ariel Daniels hadn't said a word since she left the nurse's office with her father. She hadn't cried either, not in the way most children do. The tears had dried into salt on her cheeks hours ago, leaving behind something far heavier, an emptiness that frightened Eric Daniels more than sobbing ever could. He paced the living room, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the screen as he replayed his unanswered calls to Naomi. His wife was 3 weeks into a classified mission overseas, somewhere she couldn't say, doing things she couldn't explain. All he knew was that communication was sparse at best, non-existent at worst. He left message after message anyway. "Naomi, it's bad. It's Ariel. Call Call me the second you get this. His voice cracked. Please. Upstairs, Ariel sat on her bed, knees pulled to her chest, hoodie pulled tight around her bald scalp. Maya's hoodie, the one her friend had shoved into her hands right after the incident, whispering fiercely, "Don't let them see you like this." Ariel had clung to it like armor, but even wrapped. In its folds, she felt exposed, like the walls themselves could see her. On the desk beside her sat her sketchbook. She didn't touch it. Not tonight. The pages that had once been alive with swallows and rivers and secret dreams now seemed mocking, childish. What good were wings on paper when in real life she couldn't even lift her head? Downstairs, Eric tried to keep himself together, but the images haunted him. The way Ariel had flinched when he first saw her in the nurse's office, how she avoided his eyes, how her small hands trembled as she tugged the hoodie tight over her scalp. He wanted to rage, to storm back to the school and demand answers, to break down Evelyn Ror's door and shout until the world listened. But Ariel didn't need his anger. She needed his calm. She needed a father who could hold her world steady when hers had just been destroyed. The silence in her room deepened until it felt suffocating. Ariel pressed her face into her knees and tried to remember what her mother's voice sounded like. Tried to imagine the weight of Naomi's hand resting gently on her shoulder, the way she used to after nightmares. But all she could hear was the buzzing of the clippers. It followed her, echoing, relentless, a sound that had carved its way into her bones. She shuddered. She wanted to scream, but the scream wouldn't come. Her voice had abandoned her. At the school, Principal Thomas Wexley was not sleeping either. His office blinds were drawn, his tie undone, his desk littered with statements and half-empty coffee cups. "A misunderstanding," he muttered under his breath, rehearsing the line. That's what he would tell the district. That's what he would tell the press. A one-day suspension, a press release drafted by the attorney, and it would all blow over. It always did. But the pit in his stomach told him this was different. The video. The damn video. And across town, Maya was wide awake too, sitting at her sister Jasmine's kitchen table as the older girl uploaded the clip to social media. "This is bigger than Ariel," Jasmine said, fingers flying across the keyboard. "This is about every black girl who's ever been told her hair is wrong, her body is wrong, her existence is a violation." Maya bit her lip. She wanted to protect her friend's privacy, but she also wanted justice. Her stomach knotted as the progress bar hit 100%. The video was out there now. By morning, the world was watching. 10,000 views, 20, 50. Outrage pouring in from strangers who saw in Ariel's humiliation something far larger, something systemic. Eric scrolled through the comments, torn between relief and dread. Some messages were kind, supportive. Others questioned, doubted, dismissed. "We don't know the whole story. Kids exaggerate. Why make everything about race?" He shut the phone off, heart pounding. None of those people mattered. What mattered was upstairs behind a closed bedroom door, where his daughter hadn't spoken since the moment her braids hit the floor. He carried up a tray of food, knocked softly, and left it on her desk. "Sweetheart," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I love you. We'll fix this." From the hallway, he thought he heard the faintest sound, a breath, a whisper. He pressed his ear to the door, and then it came, so quiet he almost thought he imagined it. "I want Mom." Eric closed his eyes. For the first time since the army, he felt powerless, but Naomi would come. She had to. And when she did, the silence that had suffocated their home would end, and something far louder, something unstoppable, would begin. The transport plane roared through the night sky, its cargo hold rattling with gear, and exhausted soldiers slumped in their seats. Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Daniels sat ramrod straight, her uniform immaculate even after 20 hours of travel. Her eyes, though, betrayed her, their usual steady brown now hardened into obsidian. She had faced ambushes, insurgent raids, and the chaos of war zones. Nothing had cracked her discipline, until now. Until a grainy video clip lit up her phone in the middle of a briefing, showing her 12-year-old daughter's braids falling to the floor like severed lifelines. She replayed it in her mind with surgical precision, analyzing every second the way she would enemy footage. Ariel's terror, the iron grip of the teacher dragging her, the buzzing of clippers that sounded more violent than gunfire. Naomi's hands, steady as stone in combat, had trembled watching it. She had excused herself from the tent, walked into the desert night, and called in the one favor no soldier ever uses lightly: emergency family leave. Her commanding officer hadn't argued. One look at her face told him this was not negotiable. Back in Atlanta, Eric was pacing the arrivals gate with restless energy, phone clutched tight in his palm. His messages had finally reached her. 3 simple words from her encrypted reply had been enough to anchor him through the sleepless hours. "I'm coming home." He saw her before she saw him, striding through the terminal with a duffel bag slung across her shoulder, boots hitting the tile in a cadence that silenced the noise around her. Passengers stepped aside instinctively, as though her very presence parted the crowd. But Eric didn't see the officer. He saw the wife whose shoulders were weighted with fury. He saw the mother who carried battlefields in her chest and now had one waiting at home. He opened his arms, but Naomi didn't break stride. She gripped his hand instead, eyes locked forward. "Where is she?" They drove home in silence, the city lights flashing across Naomi's face in harsh strips of yellow and shadow. Eric tried to speak to prepare her for Ariel's state, but she cut him off gently. "Don't. I need to see her first." Upstairs, Ariel hadn't moved from her bed. The hoodie was still pulled over her bare scalp, her small frame curled in on itself as though shrinking from the world. Naomi opened the door quietly, Eric staying back. She knelt beside the bed, her shadow falling over her daughter. For a long moment, she said nothing. She simply reached out, her calloused hand brushing against Ariel's sleeve. Ariel didn't flinch this time. Slowly, she lifted her head. Their eyes met, brown to brown. And in that fragile silence, Naomi saw everything. The broken trust, the humiliation, the fear, the cry for help her daughter had been too crushed to voice. Naomi's throat tightened. She had buried soldiers with fewer scars than what she now saw in her child's gaze. "I'm here, baby," she whispered. The words cracked, soft and dangerous all at once. Ariel's lip trembled, and for the first time since that horrible afternoon, she let herself lean into her mother's arms. The hoodie slipped back, exposing her scalp. Naomi's jaw clenched, but her embrace didn't falter. That night, Naomi didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers Eric had gathered. The medical exemption forms, the vague school statement, the printed screenshots of the video going viral. Her duffel bag sat untouched by the door, the sand of foreign deserts still clinging to her boots. None of it mattered now. Her battlefield had shifted. At dawn, she stood before the bathroom mirror, fastening her medals onto her dress uniform with deliberate care. Her reflection stared back at her, steel-willed, resolute. Eric came down the hall, worry etched deep into his face. "Naomi, don't do anything reckless. They're not worth your career." She adjusted her cap with precision. "This isn't about my career," she said, her tone even, controlled. "This is about my daughter." When she stepped into the hallway of Lakeside Middle later, that morning, the air itself seemed to shudder. Conversations cut short, lockers slammed closed, students pressed themselves against the walls as her boots echoed on the tile. Teachers peered from their classrooms, curiosity dissolving into unease when they saw who it was. Naomi's gaze never wavered. She moved with the unstoppable certainty of someone who had led battalions through fire. And at the end of the corridor in the teacher's lounge, Evelyn Ror laughed over coffee with her colleagues, until the door opened and the room fell into silence. Naomi Daniels stood in the doorway, medals glinting under the fluorescent lights. Ms. Ror's smile faltered, the cup trembled in her hand, and in that suspended second, she realized she had not just shaved a girl's head, she had declared war on her mother. The teacher's lounge smelled of stale coffee and lemon disinfectant. A low hum of voices floated through the air until the door creaked open and silence swept the room like a blade. Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Daniels stood in the doorway, her uniform crisp, her medals catching the fluorescent light in sharp flashes. Her presence was not merely seen, but felt. Heavy, commanding, suffocating. The teachers froze, mugs halfway to lips, conversations cut in half. At the center of the room stood Evelyn Ror, her graying bun wound tight, her smirk half-formed before recognition struck her like a blow. The color drained from her face. The mug in her hand rattled against its saucer. "Lieutenant Colonel Daniels," she stammered, voice trembling despite her attempt at composure. I didn't realize you were back from deployment." Naomi didn't step further into the room. She didn't have to. Her voice was low, steady, lethal, clearly. Her eyes locked on Ror like crosshairs. "I understand you've met my daughter. Intimately." The silence deepened until one teacher coughed nervously, gathering her things. Another muttered something about grading papers and slipped past Naomi, head bowed. One by one, they all found excuses to leave until only 2 women remained, Predator and Avenger. Evelyn set her cup down with shaking hands. "I was enforcing policy. The new dress code is very clear. Hair must be conservative, neat." "Stop!" Naomi's voice cut clean through the air. She stepped forward, closing the space until their breaths nearly collided. "Don't pretend this is about rules. Don't insult me with paperwork excuses. You and I both know exactly what this was." Ror's lips tightened. "I don't know what you mean." Naomi leaned closer, her words a whisper sharp enough to draw blood. Fort Benning, 8 years ago. Does that refresh your memory, Private Ror? Evelyn's composure cracked. Her eyes flickered. Fear, recognition, rage. You singled me out, she hissed, her voice low now, poisonous. You made sure I washed out. I should have passed. You deserved nothing, Naomi snapped, her control unshaken. You failed because you couldn't follow orders, because you filed false reports against your black peers, because you were poison in my unit just like you're poison in this school. Ror's face flushed crimson, her breathing ragged. You think you can intimidate me just because you wear a uniform? This isn't the army. This is my classroom, my rules. Naomi stepped back, her bearing cold and deliberate, her voice now for the whole building to hear. No, Evelyn, this isn't your classroom anymore. This is over. If you ever come near my daughter again, you will learn exactly why they called me the Hammer. The door slammed behind her boots as Naomi turned and walked away, leaving Ror frozen in the lounge, coffee cooling in her untouched cup. But Naomi wasn't finished. Her steps carried her down the hall, every click of her heel a drumbeat of war. She pushed open the principal's office door without knocking. Principal Thomas Wexley looked up from his desk, annoyance on his face that quickly melted into unease when he saw her. His tie was loosened, his eyes tired, his desk scattered with files. He had spent half the night on calls with the district attorney, rehearsing the lines they had agreed upon. A disciplinary misunderstanding, an unfortunate lapse, a matter under investigation. Mrs. Daniels, Lieutenant Colonel Daniels, Naomi corrected, her voice cool, precise. She strode to his desk and dropped a thick folder onto the wood. The thud made him flinch. The label read, Incident Report, Assault and Battery, Civil Rights Violation. What is this? Wexley asked, though his voice betrayed him. This, Naomi replied, her eyes unblinking, is what handling a situation looks like. Witness statements, medical documentation, the exemption forms your office received and ignored. My daughter's formal complaint from 2 weeks ago, signed, dated, stamped by your secretary, buried in a drawer. Wexley swallowed hard. We're investigating. You gave that woman a 1-day suspension, Naomi cut in, her voice sharp. 1 day. That isn't discipline. That's a vacation. The office was so still that Naomi could hear the second hand ticking on the wall clock. She leaned forward, palms flat on his desk. You failed in your duty to protect a child. You empowered a racist, vindictive woman to assault my daughter. And now, Mr. Wexley, I'm going to make sure you answer for it. Before he could reply, his desk phone buzzed. His secretary's voice quavered through the intercom. Sir, the media's here. They want a statement. Naomi straightened her cap with military precision. Good. Give them one. Tell them Naomi Daniels is back in town. Tell them this isn't just about hair. This is about justice. Behind her words, the storm was already gathering. In another office across town, District Attorney Harold Brennan was drafting a statement with the school board's lawyer, muttering about damage control and limiting liability. In a small kitchen, Maya's older sister was uploading another clip to social media. And outside Lakeside Middle, parents were already beginning to gather, holding signs scrawled in anger. The battle lines had been drawn, and Naomi Daniels, the Hammer, was ready to march. The Daniels house no longer felt like a home. It had become a war room. The dining table was buried under manila folders, printed emails, signed forms, and screenshots pulled from social media. Naomi sat at the head, posture rigid, her uniform jacket draped across the chair like a flag at half-mast. Every page she touched became part of her battle plan. She had commanded soldiers on foreign soil. Now she would command truth on American ground. Eric watched her from the doorway, exhaustion shadowing his face. You've been at this since dawn, he said softly. Naomi didn't look up. The enemy doesn't sleep. The enemy? He asked he knew the answer. Naomi finally raised her eyes, dark and burning. This isn't just about Evelyn Ror. This is about a principal who buried warnings, a district attorney who spins cruelty into misunderstanding, a school board that thinks children's dignity is a line item in their budget. This isn't one teacher. This is a system. Upstairs, Ariel sat cross-legged on the floor of her bedroom, sketchbook open in her lap. At first, her pencils had only produced darkness, jagged black strokes that clawed across the page. But tonight was different. Tonight, she drew a tree. Its trunk was thin and brittle, its branches stripped bare. But at the roots, half hidden in soil, a small green sprout reached upward. Her hands trembled as she shaded it in, but for the first time since that awful day, she felt something stir in her chest that wasn't fear. She tore the page from the book and slipped it under her pillow. Her mother would find it later. For now, Ariel whispered to herself words she hadn't spoken aloud in days. It's not over. Meanwhile, Lakeside Middle School was a fortress under siege. Parents clustered outside with handmade signs, "Justice for Ariel, protect our children." Reporters staked out the sidewalks, cameras rolling every time a teacher entered or left the building. Inside, Principal Wexley's office was in chaos. The district's attorney, Harold Brennan, barked orders into his phone. "Frame it as a misunderstanding. Focus on policy. We cannot admit liability." "But the video," Wexley began, "is incomplete," Brennan snapped. "It doesn't show the whole picture. We say Ariel was combative. We say Nurse Adams acted with indiscretion. We redirect the outrage." Wexley sank into his chair, sweat pooling at his temples. He had spent his career coasting toward a quiet retirement. Now the walls were closing in, and Naomi Daniels' name was on every news channel. That night, Naomi called in allies the way a general calls in reinforcements. Civil rights organizations, medical associations, journalists who owed her favors from past military briefings. Each conversation was clipped, efficient. "We need precedent cases. We need hair discrimination studies. We need testimony from other victims." By midnight, her laptop glowed with incoming files, documents, case law, statistics, statements, evidence piled higher than her medals ever had. But the battle wasn't just fought in courtrooms or press conferences. It was fought in the silence of a child's bedroom. Ariel lay awake, clutching her sketchbook, her thoughts spiraling. What if kids laughed when she returned to school? What if Miss Ror came back? What if the whole world thought she was weak? Her eyes burned. Then she remembered Maya, standing in the doorway that day with her phone, whispering, "Don't let her win." Ariel turned a fresh page and began to draw again. This time, two figures, one tall, in a decorated uniform, standing like a shield, the other small and bald but smiling. They stood hand in hand beneath the sprouting tree. Ariel stared at it for a long time. For the first time, she didn't feel completely alone. By morning, the protest outside Lakeside had doubled. Parents brought bullhorns, students waved signs from the windows, and in the middle of it all, Naomi stepped onto the school steps in her uniform, flanked by Eric and Ariel, who wore a colorful head wrap knotted proudly at the crown of her head. Reporters surged forward, microphones flashing. Naomi's voice carried like a command across the crowd. "My daughter was humiliated by an adult entrusted to protect her. She begged for mercy, and she was met with cruelty. This was not a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, and we will not be silent." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Naomi didn't stop. To every parry, and here, "If this happened to your child, what would you do? Would you look the other way? Or would you stand with me? Because I will not rest until every child is safe in these halls. If the system won't protect them, I will dismantle it myself." Inside his office, Wexley slammed his blinds shut, muttering under his breath, "She's turning this into a circus." Brennan scowled, adjusting his tie. "No, she's turning it into a war. And wars have sides." As the chants outside swelled, Ariel reached up and tugged gently on her mother's sleeve. Naomi bent down, expecting silence. But Ariel's voice, quiet and raw, rose above the noise. "Don't let them win, Mom." Naomi pulled her close, heart breaking and swelling all at once. She whispered into her daughter's ear, fierce and certain, "I won't, baby. I promise. This is only the beginning." Rain hammered against the courthouse windows, a steady drumbeat that matched the pulse of the crowd gathered outside. Reporters pressed shoulder to shoulder, their cameras pointed at the double doors. Protesters held signs despite the downpour. "Protect our children. Justice for Ariel." Inside, the Daniels family sat at the plaintiff's table, their attorney Grace Yamada flipping through her notes with the calm precision of a surgeon about to make the first incision. Naomi sat straight-backed, her uniform immaculate, her medals catching the sterile glow of the fluorescent lights. Her jaw was clenched, but her eyes never wavered from the front of the room. Eric sat beside her, one steadying hand resting on hers, the other clutching a worn photo of Ariel as a toddler, braids tied with bright beads. And between them sat Ariel herself, wrapped in a headscarf patterned with gold and blue. Her small hands trembled, but her spine was straight. She looked older than 12, as though trauma had aged her by years. Across the aisle, Evelyn Ror sat flanked by her high-priced attorney, Lawrence Whitfield, the kind of lawyer who could make corruption sound like charity. Ror wore a modest navy dress, hair pulled back, face arranged into a mask of weary professionalism, but her hands betrayed her, fingers twisting, knuckles white, nails digging into her palms. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, rapped her gavel. "Court is now in session." We will hear opening statements. Grace rose first. Her voice was steady, deliberate. This case is about power. It is about an adult entrusted with authority who used that authority to humiliate and harm a child. It is about a system that ignored warnings, buried complaints, and tried to cover the evidence. And most importantly, it is about Ariel Daniels, a 12-year-old girl whose dignity was stripped from her along with her braids. She let the words hang heavy in the air before sitting down. Whitfield followed, his tone oily and polished. This was an unfortunate misunderstanding. My client acted under school policy. She believed she was enforcing the rules. There was no malice, no cruelty, only a miscommunication between staff and parents. The plaintiffs want to turn this into a war, but it was a mistake, nothing more. The first witnesses painted a damning picture. Nurse Adams, eyes glistening with regret, admitted she'd handed Ror the clippers without confirming parental consent. A teacher testified she'd heard Ariel whisper about her medical condition, only to be dismissed. And then Grace called Alex Baker, the school IT technician. He shuffled nervously to the stand, clutching a flash drive like it was contraband. "Mr. Baker," Grace asked gently, "can you tell the court what Principal Wexley asked you to do with the footage from the nurse's office?" "He told me to delete it," Alex said, his voice cracking. "He said it was a privax. I matter, but that wasn't normal. We always save footage of incidents, so I lied. I backed it up." Gasps rippled through the courtroom as Grace plugged the drive into the monitor. Grainy footage flickered to life. Ariel in the nurse's chair, pleading, tears streaming, Ror holding the clippers steady as the braids fell. The room was silent except for the faint sound of someone weeping in the back row. Ror's attorney jumped up. "Objection! This prejudices the jury." The judge's gavel cut him off. "Overruled. The jury will see the truth." When it was Ariel's turn, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. A counselor walked her to the stand, her small figure dwarfed by the chair. She tugged at her headscarf nervously, eyes darting to her mother. Naomi nodded once, steady and reassuring. Grace's voice softened. "Ariel, can you tell us what happened that day?" Ariel's voice was almost a whisper at first. "She said my braids were against the rules. I told her I had alopecia, that my mom filed papers. She said I was lying." Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she pressed on. "In the nurse's office, I begged her to stop. I asked her to call my dad. She smiled while she shaved my head." The words landed like hammer blows. Jurors shifted uncomfortably, one wiping at his eyes. Grace let the silence linger before asking, "And how did that make you feel, Ariel?" Ariel's lip trembled. For a moment it seemed she wouldn't answer. Then her voice rose, steadier this time. "Like I didn't matter. Like I was nothing." She looked up, her gaze cutting straight to Ror. "But I'm not nothing. I'm still me, and I won't let her win." Naomi closed her eyes, her soldier's composure finally cracking as tears spilled down her cheeks. When Evelyn Ror finally took the stand, Whitfield tried to paint her as overworked, under pressure, a victim of circumstance. But Grace was ready. "Ms. Ror," she said coolly, "isn't it true that you served briefly in the U.S. Army?" Ror stiffened. Yes. "And isn't it true that you were discharged after repeatedly failing basic qualifications?" Her attorney objected, but the judge overruled. Grace pressed on. "Isn't it also true that Lieutenant Colonel Daniels was your commanding officer?" Ror's face flushed crimson. "She ruined me," she snapped before she could stop herself. "She always had it in for me, just like her brat does." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Grace's voice was sharp as a blade. So it wasn't about a dress code. It wasn't about discipline. It was revenge. Ror's silence was damning. The jury's eyes bored into her. Whitfield buried his face in his hands. By the time closing arguments finished, the verdict was all but written. The jury returned swiftly, their faces grave. "We find the defendants liable on all counts," the forewoman announced. "Assault, negligence, civil rights violations, emotional distress." Naomi squeezed Ariel's hand so tightly the girl winced, but she didn't let go. The judge read the damages, millions in compensation and punitive fines that would bankrupt careers and shake the district to its core. And then came the final hammer strike. Detective Michael Sullivan entered the courtroom, badge flashing. He strode straight to Ror. "Evelyn Ror, you are under arrest for aggravated assault and child endangerment in connection with prior complaints. Please stand." Cameras flashed as handcuffs clicked. For the first time, Ariel didn't look away. She lifted her chin, eyes locked on the woman who had humiliated her. No fear, no shame, only quiet defiance. Outside, as Naomi spoke to the cameras, the rain broke and sunlight burst through the clouds. Her voice carried strong, unwavering. This was never just about hair. It was about dignity, about justice, and about every child who deserves to walk into school without fear. And beside her, Ariel finally smiled, small, fragile, but real. The world had tried to erase her, but Ariel Daniels had redrawn herself.